Men years apart, different lives, different families. But one connection bound them together, a mysterious religious group in California. In 2017, a young man's life spiraled into silence after joining. His family searched, desperate for answers, but the group told them he had chosen to leave. 6 years later, another man, also tied to the same organization, disappeared. This time, families and investigators began to connect the dots. Who was this group? What secrets were they hiding? And why did two men vanish, both with their names whispered in connection to his way spirit-led assemblies? This is their story. Southern California, a region known for its endless sprawl of highways, desert towns, and suburbs. Amid the ordinary neighborhoods, one small religious group built its presence. The His Way Spirit-led assemblies. At first glance, the group looked like any small church. They held services in rented halls, sang familiar hymns, and spoke of family, unity, and healing. For outsiders, it looked harmless, one of the countless independent churches that dotted California's landscape. But those who stepped inside described something different. Rules, restrictions, a leader whose word was absolute. Former members say they were told to cut off outside friendships, avoid questioning teachings, and dedicate their lives to the group's cause. Those who resisted were shamed, sometimes even threatened. It wasn't long before whispers grew in the surrounding community. Something about the group felt wrong, and soon those whispers would turn into fear. If you want more stories like this, remember to subscribe. His name was David Martinez, 31 years old, a construction worker from Riverside County. David was quiet but kind. He loved old cars, often spending weekends fixing up his father's Chevy. He was known for his shy smile and the way he'd stay late to help neighbors without being asked. But in 2016, David's life took a turn. He had lost a close friend in a car accident. Grief weighed on him. Searching for answers, he stumbled across the His Way Spirit-led assemblies. The group welcomed him instantly. They promised healing. They promised community. They told him his pain had a purpose. And David believed them. Within months, he was spending nearly every day with the group. His family noticed the changes. He no longer came by for Sunday dinners. His once lively conversations grew muted. He avoided old friends, dismissing them as a distraction. When his mother asked if he was okay, David replied with words that didn't sound like him at all. "I finally found people who understand what God wants from me. They're my real family now." In early 2017, David called his sister late one night. His voice trembled. He said he wanted to leave the group. "They're controlling everything," he whispered. "I can't even decide who I talk to anymore. Something isn't right here." The call ended abruptly. 2 days later, David was gone. His car was found near a park. Keys still inside. No sign of struggle. No note. His family reported him missing immediately. But when police contacted the group's leaders, they claimed David had left voluntarily. "David wanted to walk away from his old life," one leader said. "He told us he was starting fresh. We don't know where he went." But his family didn't believe it. His bank account was untouched. His clothes were still in his apartment. He hadn't withdrawn a single dollar. David Martinez had vanished. David's mother, Rosa, spent nights driving through neighborhoods, hoping to catch sight of him. She printed flyers, stapled them to street poles, slipped them under windshields. His younger sister, Anna, sat by the phone, refusing to leave the house, terrified she'd miss his call. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and still nothing. The family begged police to dig deeper into the group. But without evidence of foul play, the case stalled. David was listed as a missing adult. His file sat on a shelf, slowly gathering dust. But to his family, the silence was deafening. Rosa clutched her son's photo each night, whispering prayers. "He wouldn't leave us like this," she said. "Something happened, and I won't stop until I know." While David's family searched, others began to speak. Former members described pressure tactics inside the group. Sleep deprivation during prayer nights, strict tithes even from members who were broke, a rule forbidding outside relationships without approval. One woman, a former member named Karen, told investigators, "They control you by cutting you off. Once you're inside, your old life doesn't exist anymore." Police noted these statements but could not prove a direct link to David's disappearance. The group continued holding meetings. New members walked in each week, unaware of the shadow hanging over them. By late 2017, David's story faded from the headlines. His family still searched, but resources dried up. Other cases crowded the news. Other crises took attention. But Rosa never gave up. She kept David's room exactly as it was. His jacket still hung by the door. His toolbox sat in the garage, untouched. Each birthday, she baked a cake, set out a candle, and prayed for his return. The mystery remained. What happened to David Martinez? 6 years passed. And then 2023. Another man tied to his way spirit-led assemblies disappeared. This time, the similarities were undeniable. Families began to whisper again. Investigators reopened files. And what had once been dismissed as coincidence now looked far more sinister. The cult-like group was once again at the center of a mystery. But this time, the world was watching. David Martinez disappears. His family never sees him again. His name slowly slips from the headlines. But 6 years later, another man vanishes. And once again, the same religious group is named in whispers. For families still searching for answers, this is not coincidence. It is a pattern. His name was Ethan Wallace, 39 years old, a mechanic from Ventura County. Ethan was different from David in many ways. He was outspoken, confident, and known for his booming laugh. He had 2 young children from a previous marriage, and despite the difficulties of divorce, he remained close to them. But underneath the surface, Ethan was struggling. He had battled alcohol dependency for years, and after a relapse in 2022, he wanted a fresh start. That was when he found his way spirit-led assemblies. Like David, Ethan was drawn in by the promise of healing. The group offered him structure, brotherhood, and redemption. First, it seemed to work. He stopped drinking. He found a support system. He smiled again. But soon, his family noticed the darker side. Phone calls became shorter. Visits with his children less frequent. His once colorful personality grew rigid. He quoted the group's leader constantly, using words that didn't sound like his own. His sister, Marissa, recalled one conversation. "He told me the group gave him the truth no one else wanted him to know. He said I wouldn't understand unless I joined. That's when I realized we were losing him." By early 2023, Ethan was deeply involved in the group. He attended every service, every late-night session. He donated nearly half his income, but he also began to express doubts. To a close friend outside the group, he confided, "They say they're saving me, but I feel trapped. They want all my time, all my money. I don't know if I can get out." Then came the message that chilled his family. In March 2023, Ethan sent his mother a text. "If anything happens to me, don't trust what they say." That was the last message she ever received. On a warm April evening in 2023, Ethan was last seen leaving a group gathering. Witnesses said he looked agitated. He walked out quickly, refusing rides from fellow members. The next morning, his car was found abandoned on a back road near Ojai. The driver's side door was open. His wallet was inside. No signs of struggle. No note. Just like David 6 years earlier. When police questioned the group's leaders, their answers were nearly identical to before. Ethan told us he was leaving to start over. He wanted to distance himself. We respected his decision. But his family knew better. He had told them he was afraid. He had told them he felt watched. And he had warned them not to believe the group's story. Ethan's sister Marissa refused to let his case fade like David's. She contacted news outlets, spoke on camera, and demanded police action. She held vigils, raising candles under the night sky, surrounded by photos of Ethan laughing with his children. "We cannot lose another man to this group," she said, voice breaking. "We need answers." Former members began stepping forward, emboldened by the renewed attention. One described seeing Ethan argue with a leader shortly before his disappearance. Another claimed Ethan wanted to expose the group's practices. Suddenly, David's case from 2017 didn't look like an isolated tragedy. It looked like the first piece of a dark puzzle. By mid-2023, detectives began re-examining both disappearances. They found parallels. Both men were heavily involved with his way spirit-led assemblies. Both expressed doubts and fears shortly before vanishing. Both left behind personal belongings. Both were dismissed by the group as having chosen to leave. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Detectives brought in former members for interviews. The stories painted a disturbing picture. Leaders demanded absolute loyalty. Those who questioned rules were shunned. Leaving the group was portrayed as a betrayal of God. For investigators, this raised a terrifying possibility. If leaving was seen as betrayal, what happened to those who tried? In late 2024, a breakthrough came. Authorities arrested several group leaders on unrelated weapons charges. During the raid, investigators seized documents, computers, and recordings. Buried in the files were references to discipline sessions and departures. Some entries listed initials eerily close to David Martinez and Ethan Wallace. But what did departure mean? Did it mean leaving voluntarily? Or something else entirely? The arrests cracked open the door. But the full truth remained locked in shadow. For the first time, the families of David and Ethan met. They shared stories. They shared grief. They compared the chilling similarities in their sons' and brothers' disappearances. Together, they formed a coalition, demanding that both cases be treated as connected investigations. Standing side by side, Rosa Martinez and Marissa Wallace addressed the press. Two men gone, two families shattered. How many more before someone listens? Their voices shook, but their resolve was unbreakable. Meanwhile, former members who had left the group began to fear for their safety. Some reported being followed. Others received late-night calls with silence on the line. A few found threatening notes on their cars. One woman, only identified as Rebecca, summed it up. They don't let go. Once you've been inside, they make sure you're too scared to speak. As 2023 turned to 2024, two men remained missing. Two families remained in limbo, and the group still operated quietly in small corners of California. Police had files, families had hope, but answers remained elusive. The question still echoed. What really happened to David Martinez and Ethan Wallace? And how many more lives had the group touched in silence? Two men, 6 years apart, vanish under eerily similar circumstances. Both tied to his way spirit-led assemblies. Both families left broken, waiting. But in late 2024, a police raid on the group's leaders uncovers documents, recordings, and files that begin to peel back the curtain. And what investigators find is darker than anyone expected. It happened on a gray November morning. Armed officers surrounded the modest compound the group used for gatherings in Riverside County. The charges were not directly about disappearances. Instead, they centered on illegal weapons possession. But detectives knew this was their chance. They seized everything: laptops, handwritten journals, audio recordings of discipline sessions, stacks of binders labeled with years: 2016, 2017, 2023. The leaders were led away in handcuffs, but the most important evidence remained inside the files now in police custody. As investigators combed through the binders, they found repeated entries under a column labeled Departures. 2017, DM, Departure Complete. 2023, EW, Departure Complete. The initials matched David Martinez and Ethan Wallace. What did departure mean? Former members said it was the group's word for anyone who left. But paired with the vanishings, the phrase now carried a sinister weight. Even more chilling, one note scribbled in the margin read, "Departure necessary for purity." Among the seized evidence were hours of audio recordings. Many were routine sermons, but others revealed a different side of the group. A man's voice, believed to be a senior leader, declared, "If they walk away from God, and those who abandon God must be dealt with." The congregation responded with shouts of "Amen." For investigators, the line blurred chillingly between spiritual metaphor and possible threat. With the arrests making headlines, more ex-members came forward. One, who asked to be called Elena, described Ethan's final weeks. "He told me he was afraid they would make an example of him. He said, 'If I go missing, they did it.' Those were his exact words." Another ex-member recalled David's final night in 2017. "He looked broken. He said, 'I can't do this anymore.' The next day he was gone. No one ever mentioned his name again. It was like he never existed." The testimonies painted a grim pattern. Those who questioned the group disappeared. For Rosa Martinez, the evidence was both relief and torment. She finally had proof her son was not simply choosing to leave, but she still had no answers about where he was, or whether he was even alive. Marissa Wallace wept as detectives shared the files. "They wrote his initials like he was nothing more than a note in a book," she said. "My brother was a father, a son, a friend. He deserved better than to be erased." News outlets exploded with the story. Headlines blared. Cult files reveal departures matching missing men. California religious group under investigation for disappearances. Crowds gathered outside the courthouse during hearings for the leaders. Some were family members of missing men. Others were strangers who felt compelled to stand with them. The group, once hidden in obscurity, was now under the harsh glare of national attention. Despite the evidence, detectives faced a challenge. The files were suggestive, not conclusive. The recordings were ominous, but not definitive proof of murder or abduction. And the leaders' lawyers argued that departure simply meant leaving the faith. Without bodies, without direct witnesses, the cases against the group for David and Ethan's disappearances remained painfully thin. Detectives pushed forward, but the weight of uncertainty hung heavy. The Martinez and Wallace families refused to let the momentum die. They launched a joint campaign, appearing on news broadcasts and podcasts. They printed new posters. They demanded lawmakers take action on cult-related disappearances. Their voices echoed beyond California. "Two men are gone," Rosa said firmly into a microphone. "We will not stop until the truth is known. We tell these stories so their voices aren't forgotten. Subscribe to keep their memory alive." The files gave investigators their first real leads. But the deeper they looked, the darker the trail became. And in 2025, whispers emerged of other names hidden in the group's records. More initials. More departures. Were David and Ethan the only ones? Or were there others? Lost in silence. Their families still waiting? The investigation had only begun. Two men vanished. David Martinez in 2017, Ethan Wallace in 2023. Both tied to his Way Spirit-led assemblies. Police raids in 2024 unearthed documents that referenced departures. But investigators soon discovered there were more names. Among the seized binders, detectives uncovered multiple entries stretching back nearly a decade. 2014, JH departure. 2015, SL departure. 2016, MP departure. Each set of initials matched a time when families in the region had reported loved ones missing. One of them, SL, corresponded to Samuel Lewis, a 24-year-old college student who vanished in 2015 after telling friends he was attending a new prayer circle. At the time, police treated his case as a runaway. But now it was being re-examined through a far darker lens. As the new initials made headlines, more families came forward. One mother, Lorraine Parker, clutched a photo of her daughter, Melissa. She joined the group when she was 19. She told me they were like family. Then one day she stopped answering calls. They told me she had left to serve God elsewhere. I never heard from her again. For years, Lorraine had felt alone, her pleas ignored. Now, she realized she was not the only one. Investigators reached out to survivors, those who had managed to leave the group alive. One man, who used the pseudonym Daniel, described his final days inside. When someone was labeled a departure, it was like they no longer existed. You weren't allowed to say their name. You couldn't ask questions. If you did, you risked becoming the next departure. Another survivor, Maya, spoke of Ethan's last night. He argued with one of the elders. He said he wanted to leave. They told him, "If you walk away, God will deal with you." The next morning, he was gone. Her voice broke as she added, "I should have warned someone. I thought it was just threats. I didn't think they would really make him disappear." By spring 2025, investigators had identified at least 5 possible disappearances tied to the group. Each followed a similar pattern. The individual became deeply involved in the group. They began showing fear or doubt. They attempted to leave. They vanished, with the group claiming they had moved on. What once seemed like 2 isolated tragedies now looked like a chilling pattern spanning a decade. The revelations sparked outrage. Protesters gathered outside courthouses and state buildings, holding signs reading, "Where are they? No more departures. Faith shouldn't mean fear." Documentaries, podcasts, and investigative articles exploded across the country, all asking the same question. How many lives had this group taken in silence? The remaining leaders denied everything. In statements issued through lawyers, they insisted departures referred only to members voluntarily leaving. "This is a smear campaign," one statement read. "Our church has helped countless people. Those who left did so of their own free will." But their words rang hollow in the face of mounting testimonies and missing names. By mid-2025, the families of the vanished had formed an alliance. They called it the Coalition for the Departed. Together, they held rallies, pressed lawmakers, and demanded stronger oversight of closed religious groups. Rosa Martinez, speaking with tears in her eyes, told a crowd, "We are not here for revenge. We are here for truth. My son's name was David. He was not a departure. He was a human being, and I will not let the world forget him." Her words echoed through the crowd, carried by the voices of other grieving parents and siblings. Detectives pressed harder. They re-examined old missing persons reports, re-interviewed former members, and pieced together timelines. Still, the hardest question remained unanswered. Where were the bodies? Without physical evidence, the cases were fragile. The group's leaders could continue to claim innocence. But detectives were convinced the truth was buried somewhere. By late 2025, whispers emerged of an abandoned property once owned by the group in the desert outside Barstow. Former members claimed it had been used for discipline. Others called it the House of Silence. Detectives prepared to search it, hoping it might finally reveal what happened to David, Ethan, and the others. But as the search began, families braced themselves. Would it bring answers? Or would it reveal horrors they were not prepared to face? By 2025, families of David Martinez and Ethan Wallace had joined with others, forming the Coalition for the Departed. Police had seized files from his Way Spirit-led assemblies, finding initials and chilling references to departures. And now, detectives were preparing to search an abandoned desert property once owned by the group, known among ex-members as the House of Silence. The property sat on the edge of Barstow, surrounded by miles of dust and rock. The house itself was little more than a crumbling structure. Sun-bleached walls, boarded windows, and a rusted gate hanging loose. Neighbors said the place had been empty for years, but former members insisted it had once been used for discipline. Some claimed screams were heard there at night. Others said members were taken there and never returned. Now, investigators hoped the desert would give up its secrets. At dawn, detectives arrived with forensic teams. Yellow tape wrapped around the property. Reporters gathered just beyond the perimeter, cameras fixed on the house. Inside, the team found shackles bolted to a concrete wall in one room, a mattress stained and decayed, charred remains of journals in a rusted barrel. Every corner of the house seemed to whisper of things done in silence. But the most chilling discovery lay behind the house. As forensic dogs scoured the property, they alerted near a patch of disturbed earth. Digging began. Within hours, Skeletal remains surfaced. Small fragments at first, then entire bones. The desert had kept its secrets, but not forever. Investigators carefully collected everything, sending remains to labs for DNA analysis. Families were told to brace themselves. News of the discovery spread like wildfire. Families gathered outside the county medical examiner's office, clutching photos and praying. Rosa Martinez stood with her daughter, Anna, holding a framed picture of David. "Part of me wants answers," Rosa whispered, "but part of me is terrified of what they will tell us." Marissa Wallace sat quietly in a corner, tears streaming down her face as she scrolled through old photos of Ethan laughing with his children. "I just want to bring him home," she said. Headlines exploded across the nation. Human remains found at desert property linked to religious group. California cult under fire as families demand justice. Talk shows, podcasts, and documentaries dissected every detail. The group was no longer obscure. It was now a household name associated with fear and disappearance. From their jail cells, group leaders issued statements through attorneys. They denied involvement. They claimed the desert property had been abandoned long before the men vanished. "This is a witch hunt," their lawyers declared. "Our clients are innocent." But the mounting evidence told a different story. Weeks later, DNA tests confirmed that the remains belonged to at least 3 individuals. But the fragments were incomplete. Some bones too degraded to identify. 2 sets of remains matched Samuel Lewis, 2015, and Melissa Parker, 2016. But the families of David Martinez and Ethan Wallace received no answers. Neither man's DNA was found, at least not yet. For Rosa and Marissa, hope and despair intertwined. They were relieved to see other families finally get answers. But their own nightmare continued. The coalition of families grew even more determined. They now carried the proof that the group had been hiding deaths. But each vigil, each press conference, carried the weight of absence. Candles flickered in the night as names were read aloud. David Martinez, Ethan Wallace, Samuel Lewis, Melissa Parker. The list was growing. Detectives weren't finished. A new lead suggested there might be another property, a remote cabin used by the group in the San Bernardino Mountains. Whispers from survivors hinted at more secrets, more darkness hidden in the woods. The search was far from over, and for the families of David and Ethan, the nightmare continued. The desert property revealed shallow graves, shackles, and burned journals. But DNA only confirmed some victims. David Martinez and Ethan Wallace were still missing. Then came whispers of another site, a mountain cabin once used by the group. Detectives prepared for another search. Families prepared for more heartbreak. The cabin sat deep in the San Bernardino Mountains. Reached only by a narrow dirt road, it was hidden beneath thick pines and fog. Neighbors recalled strange activity years earlier. Lights on all night, chanting that carried through the trees. Then sudden silence when the group abandoned it. Detectives suspected this cabin was used for discipline sessions. The final stop for those labeled as departures. Officers arrived at dawn. The cabin looked lifeless, wood rotting, shutters broken, roof sagging. Inside they found a chair bolted to the floor with restraints, a wall covered in scripture verses, scrawled in black marker, rusted buckets and chains in the basement. It was not a home. It was a prison. As news of the cabin spread, more survivors came forward. One, identified as Rachel, told detectives, "I was taken there once. They called it a purification retreat. But it was punishment. They locked me in the basement for 3 days with no food. They told me if I resisted again, I'd become a departure." Another survivor recalled hearing screams echo through the woods late at night. "We asked what was happening. They said someone was wrestling with demons. But then that person was never seen again." Behind the cabin, investigators uncovered a makeshift fire pit. Inside were fragments of burned clothing, melted plastic IDs, and bone fragments. Tests later confirmed the bones belonged to at least 2 individuals. But once again, they were too degraded to conclusively match David or Ethan. The search raised hope and horror in equal measure. The Martinez and Wallace families stood outside the mountain site, candles in hand. Rosa whispered through tears, "Is this where my son spent his last night? Did he cry out for me?" Marissa held tightly to Ethan's children, shielding them from reporters. They promised him healing. Instead, they gave him chains. Detectives now had two sites, two places tied to torture, silence, and disappearance. The evidence mounted. Files listing departures. Survivor accounts of threats and punishments. Remains scattered across multiple properties. It was no longer possible to dismiss the group's role as mere coincidence. But prosecutors faced obstacles. Without clear cause of death, without definitive links between remains and the missing men, charges for homicide remained difficult. Defense attorneys argued that the group's practices were extreme but lawful. They framed survivors as disgruntled former members. And so, the case teetered between justice and uncertainty. The families refused to back down. The coalition for the departed grew into a statewide movement. They held rallies in Sacramento, demanding new laws to regulate cult-like groups and ensure faster intervention in disappearance cases. At one rally, Rosa raised David's photo high and declared, "We will not let our children vanish in silence. If the system cannot protect them, then we will force it to change." The crowd roared in agreement. By late 2025, investigators received a tip from a former member. They claimed the group kept a hidden ledger, a book that documented every departure in full detail. If true, it could be the smoking gun. But finding it would mean uncovering the group's darkest secret, hidden somewhere beyond the cabin and desert. 2 properties searched. Shallow graves, shackles, burned journals, families waiting in agony. But a survivor's tip introduced a new lead. A ledger, a hidden book documenting the group's departures in full detail. If found, it could be the key to unlocking everything. The tip came from a former member known only as Isaac. He told detectives he once saw the leader carry a thick, leather-bound book. Inside, names and dates were written in careful script. Each time a person vanished, their name was crossed out. Isaac whispered, "It wasn't just a list. It was like a scorecard." They believed each departure purified the group. They treated it like a victory. He claimed the ledger was hidden in a safe, somewhere tied to the group's inner circle. Detectives pored over property records, searching for any overlooked sites owned by the group. They found one, a storage unit in Riverside, registered under a shell company linked to the church. When officers arrived, they found boxes of old furniture, hymnals, and broken instruments. But no ledger. The search felt like chasing a ghost. Even as evidence mounted, not everyone turned away from the group. A small band of loyalists continued to defend their leaders. They gathered outside courthouses, holding signs that read, "Stop the witch hunt. Our leaders are innocent." They chose to leave. One woman shouted at reporters, "This is persecution. These men and women gave us hope." The so-called missing people left because they were weak. The defiance chilled families. To them, it proved the group's control still lingered like a shadow. Weeks later, a second tip surfaced. This time from a man serving time for fraud, once a treasurer inside the group. He told detectives the ledger wasn't kept in a storage unit or home. It was hidden in a church property in Los Angeles County, inside the walls themselves. They built a false panel in the office. Behind it, a safe. That's where they kept the ledger. Armed with this information, investigators obtained a warrant. The search team entered the property at night. They tore through drywall, searching every hidden cavity. And then they found it. A steel safe, bolted behind a false wall. Inside, a single book, thick and leather-bound. The ledger, page after page, documented years of names, initials, full names, and dates. Beside each entry, notes like, "Doubted leadership," "Attempted escape," "Departure complete," David Martinez, crossed out, Ethan Wallace, crossed out, Samuel Lewis, Melissa Parker, others. At the back of the book, a chilling line, The purest church is the one without defectors. When detectives revealed the ledger's existence, families broke down. Rosa Martinez clutched David's photo, sobbing, "Now they cannot deny it. His name is there. They knew what they did." Marissa Wallace trembled as she read Ethan's entry. "Departure complete." That's all they wrote. "Like my brother's life was nothing." The ledger gave confirmation, but not closure. Their loved ones were still missing, bodies unfound, justice not yet delivered. With the ledger, prosecutors finally had leverage. It tied disappearances directly to the group's records. But the defense fought back, arguing the book was symbolic, nothing more than religious metaphor. Still, momentum was shifting. The case against the group's leaders was stronger than ever. As 2026 approached, prosecutors prepared indictments. But behind the scenes, detectives whispered about something even darker. References in the ledger to unrecorded departures. Cases where names were left blank, as if the victims had never existed. How many more were missing? How many families never even knew to ask questions? The ledger opened a door, and behind it, the abyss was far deeper than anyone feared. The desert gave up its graves. The mountains revealed their chains. And the ledger, hidden behind false walls, listed the names of the lost. Now, in 2026, the leaders of his Way Spirit-led assemblies were facing court. Families hoped for justice, but loyalists swore to protect their shepherds. The trial would decide more than guilt. It would decide if the truth could ever be spoken aloud. Crowds filled the courthouse steps in Riverside County. On one side, families clutching photos of the vanished. On the other, loyalists with signs reading "Faith on Trial." Inside, the atmosphere was tense. Prosecutors prepared to argue the disappearances were no accident. The defense insisted there was no proof of murder, only faith misunderstood. One by one, survivors took the stand. Rachel, her voice trembling, described her 3 days in the mountain cabin. "They told me if I resisted again, I'd be a departure. I believed them. I thought I would die there." Maya recalled Ethan's last night. He told them he wanted to leave. They said, "Then God will deal with you." He never came back. Each testimony painted the same picture. Control, fear, punishment, silence. When the ledger was presented, the courtroom gasped. Page after page of names, crossed out with chilling precision. Prosecutors pointed directly to the entries. David Martinez, 2017. Ethan Wallace, 2023. Samuel Lewis. Melissa Parker. "This is not metaphor," the prosecutor declared. "This is record-keeping. This is evidence of human lives destroyed." The defense countered. "It is symbolic, a spiritual text, nothing more." But the words "departure complete" echoed too sharply for anyone to ignore. Outside court, Rosa Martinez addressed reporters. "This ledger proves what we always knew. My son didn't walk away. He was taken. I want the world to hear me. David mattered." Marissa Wallace, clutching Ethan's photo, added, "They wrote his life away with 2 words. We will not let them write the ending." Their voices carried far beyond the courthouse. Defense lawyers attacked survivors' credibility, calling them bitter, unstable, or motivated by fame. They argued the group's extreme practices were lawful religious expression. They reminded jurors, there were no bodies for David or Ethan, no definitive cause of death for the remains found. And in the eyes of the law, doubt was powerful. The jury sat silent, weighed down by the stories. Evidence was strong, but not absolute. Emotion was raw, but justice required certainty. Would they believe the ledger was proof of crimes, or see it as symbolic writing? As weeks passed, the strain on families deepened. Rosa's health faltered under the pressure. Marissa grew withdrawn, her children asking why their father's case dragged on. The Coalition for the Departed held nightly vigils outside the courthouse, candles flickering against the dark. Each night ended with one chant, "Where are they?" Midway through the trial, prosecutors unveiled a new piece of evidence. A hidden recording discovered on one of the seized laptops. the voice of a leader, cold and direct. When they leave, they are no longer of this world. Their departure must be made complete. No one asks where they went. No one says their names. The courtroom froze. Families wept. Survivors held their breath. It was not metaphor. It was confession. With the recording played, the balance shifted. But would it be enough? The jury now held the power. The verdict would decide if justice came, or if silence won again. Two men, David Martinez and Ethan Wallace. Two families searching for truth. Files, testimonies, and a ledger. And finally, a recording where the group's leaders spoke of departures as more than faith, but as something final. We tell these stories so their voices aren't forgotten. Subscribe to keep their memory alive. Now, in a silent courtroom, a jury prepared to deliver judgment. For 3 days, the jury deliberated. Inside, they pored over the ledger, replayed the recording, and weighed survivor testimonies against the defense's insistence of symbolism. Outside, families gathered, waiting with candles and photos. Reporters camped on the courthouse steps. The world held its breath. On the 4th day, the jury filed back into the courtroom. The foreman stood, voice steady. We, the jury, find the defendants guilty. Charges included conspiracy, unlawful imprisonment, and negligent homicide. While prosecutors had not proven every disappearance beyond doubt, the weight of evidence tied the group to multiple unlawful deaths. Gasps filled the room. Some families wept with relief. Others cried in sorrow, still without bodies to bury. The leaders sat stone-faced, their loyalists stunned into silence. Rosa Martinez clutched her daughter, whispering, "We did it, David. We didn't forget you." Marissa Wallace broke down, holding Ethan's photo. Justice doesn't bring him back, but it tells the world he mattered. For the coalition of the departed, the verdict was not an ending, but a recognition. Outside, loyalists shouted of persecution and false justice. But cracks formed quickly. Some abandoned the cause, shaken by the verdict. Others admitted they had been deceived, ashamed to have defended leaders who treated lives as expendable. The group, once secretive and united, began to unravel in public view. The case ignited debate across the nation. Lawmakers called for new measures to monitor high-control religious groups. Advocacy organizations pushed for stronger protections for vulnerable members. Talk shows and podcasts dissected every detail. Documentaries followed. The story of David, Ethan, and the others became a symbol, a warning of how faith twisted into control could cost lives. Even with the guilty verdict, grief lingered. Rosa kept David's room untouched, waiting for the day she might still learn where his body lay. Marissa tucked Ethan's children into bed each night, telling them stories of their father's laughter, his warmth, his love. Justice had come. Closure had not. Survivors, once silenced by fear, began to speak freely. Rachel, the woman once locked in the cabin, founded a support group for others leaving high-control organizations. Maya, who saw Ethan's last night, began working with lawmakers to strengthen laws on coercive control. Their voices carried, turning trauma into strength. In the courthouse archives, the ledger now sat under lock and key. Its final page bore no names, only one chilling phrase written in fading ink. The faithful endure, the weak depart. For the families, those words no longer held power. They had endured. They had spoken. They had forced the truth into light. The trial ended. The leaders were sentenced. The group dissolved. But the stories of David, Ethan, Samuel, Melissa, and the others lived on. Not as departures, but as sons, daughters, fathers, and friends whose lives were stolen. And through their families' fight, their silence became a voice that shook a nation. The jury has spoken. The leaders of his way spirit-led assemblies stand convicted. Families have fought, survivors have spoken, and the world has listened. But even with justice served, the deeper lesson remains. For nearly a decade, people vanished under the shadow of a group that promised hope but dealt in control. David Martinez, Ethan Wallace, Samuel Lewis, Melissa Parker. Their names, once whispers in the dark, now stand as a testimony against silence. They remind us of a truth. When we ignore the small signs, control disguised as care, obedience demanded in place of love, silence can cost lives. The Martinez and Wallace families did not let their loved ones be erased. They stood in front of cameras, in courtrooms, and in the streets. They turned grief into determination. Through their voices, justice stirred. Through their strength, other families found the courage to come forward. Survivors, once silenced by fear, now speak with clarity. Rachel, I lived. And because I lived, I will tell the truth. Maya, Ethan's story will not fade. Neither will mine. Their message is one we cannot forget. Control disguised as faith is not salvation. It is bondage. This story is not just about one group in California. It is about every hidden place where power is abused. Every silence that hides suffering. Every voice told to stay quiet. The lesson is clear: vigilance matters. Speaking matters. Refusing silence matters. Because silence is the soil where injustice grows. As the sun set on the courthouse steps, candles flickered in honor of the lost. David, Ethan, Samuel, Melissa, not departures, not names crossed out in a ledger, but lives, loved ones, human beings. Their families endured, their truth endured, and now their voices endure through us. You've been watching Storyline Chronicles. Stories like this are not easy to tell, but they are necessary. They remind us of the cost of silence and the power of speaking out. If the story moved you, share it. Let others hear it. Keep these names alive. And if you believe voices like David's and Ethan's should never fade, then stand with us. Like this video, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to Storyline Chronicles, where we bring untold stories into the light, because their silence must end with us.